Hello, this is Mike Van Meter, and welcome to the Recovery is Possible, Hope and Healing with Mike and Lillie podcast. I want to thank you for joining me, and you can reach us at our Facebook site, which is also called Recovery is Possible, and our website, which is vanmeterwellnesssolutions.com. This podcast exists to educate the public about addiction, remove the stigma associated with addiction, and offer help and support to those suffering from addiction. Hey everybody, this is Mike Van Meter, and welcome to Recovery is Possible. And this is the place where we talk about recovery, healing, and ways to get well. And I have to apologize to all of you. It's been a little while since I've done an episode, and that's because I've been involved in a lot of things in the community that I can probably talk about sometime later down the road. But it's been able to take me away from podcasting and bringing content to you. But the good news is I'm back, and I plan on doing a lot more episodes, and there's going to be some changes. And today I would like to discuss what that change is going to be and why I'm making this change. And so I'm going to make the announcement right now, and we are going to be changing the name of this podcast from Recovery is Possible to Recovery is Possible, Hope and Healing with Mike and Lillie. Now, you might be asking, what's that all about? Well, what that's all about is I'd like to bring Lillie onto the program and have her contribute to the content, because all of you know that addiction is a family disease. And in fact, on average, about 7 people in your life, if you're an addict, are impacted. It's actually a lot more than that, but I mean directly impacted. And addiction is something that needs to be addressed, not just by the addict themselves, but by everybody around them. And what I mean by that is that the addict needs to get well, but the family members need to get well in addition to the addict. And so what we want to do is bring content to you that really talks about not just the person that's affected by the disease of addiction, but those that are indirectly affected by the disease of addiction. And so that's going to be a phenomenal addition to this particular podcast. Now, you guys might remember Lillie. If you've listened to all the episodes of this podcast, Lillie was episode 1. And she was episode 100. So if you've not listened to that, go back, listen to 1 and 100, and you'll hear her talk about her story. And for those of you that don't know, Lillie's my wife. And she tells in episode 1 her version of my story, and how my story was impacting her at the time. And then she did an anniversary edition later on in episode 100. So with that, I want to bring Lillie on to the program and have her talk a little bit, introduce herself, and talk about why she decided to become a part of this program and what she plans on contributing to future episodes. So with that, Lillie, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And she's smiling from ear to ear. So, Lillie, go ahead and just tell us a bit about yourself and why you decided to start contributing content.
So, just like Mike had said, when we started this journey, I agreed to do episode 1 begrudgingly. And then I asked him if he included me, that the loved one I was talking about was someone else. So it wasn't to identify Mike. It was to be more in a third person. Because I didn't want to at that time I wanted to stay anonymous. And then when he was coming up on his 100th episode, I asked him, okay, I don't mind coming back, but this time I still wanted to be anonymous. But August 12th is just around the corner, and that'll be 36 years of marriage. And it will actually be on August 13th, will be is it your 13th or your 14th year of sobriety?
Actually, I got to correct you on that. August 12th, our anniversary date and my sobriety date are the same day.
Oh, okay.
I think where you're getting that number from is my sobriety date is August 12th, but it will be 13 years.
Ah, okay. Well, congratulations on meeting 13 years. And I think that if I remember, because it's been a while, August 11th is when you had half a beer, and you were on antabuse at the time. And so you lit up like a lobster, And you said that felt really bad. And so that was your very last beer, half a beer on August 11th. So I think it's interesting and actually very appropriate that when we celebrate our anniversary, it will be your 13th year. So congratulations.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it was unplanned, actually. We did not, you think, okay, well, how about that? It's your sobriety date and your anniversary date are the same date. We actually did not plan it that way. And what had happened was, as many of you know, you can go through treatment, you can go through a detox, you can go through inpatient treatment, and that doesn't always mean that you're going to get sober right away. And that was absolutely the case with me. And so I went on antabuse, and if you're not familiar with antabuse, that's kind of the nuclear attack for addiction, for alcoholism in particular. And what it does is it's the drug that if you drink on it, you're going to really wish that you hadn't pretty quick. And I remember being in the bedroom, having that half a beer, and Lillie walked into the room and she said, you've been drinking. And I said, no, I haven't. And I did the typical addict thing. I'm like, are you kidding me? Do you not trust me? Oh my gosh, I can't believe you don't trust me. The stuff that we all do. And you just looked at me and you said, come here, take a look in the mirror. And I looked in the mirror, my face looked like a lobster. And you said, you're going to have a good night. You're going to have a crappy night. Good luck. And that's exactly the way it was. It was a terrible night. And that was the last drink that I ever had. And in the future, we'll talk about what led up to that. I talked about all the treatment episodes, and we'll kind of go through how all of that works and how that's kind of typical in recovery. It doesn't have to be the recovery experience, but for many people it is, and it was certainly true of me. I was not one and done. I was not one of those people that went to their first AA meeting and was done, or first treatment episode and was done. No. It was quite difficult for me, and we'll talk about that in the future. But for tonight, what I want to talk about is her coming onto the program, and then the slight change in the name of the podcast itself. And we are changing to Recovery is Possible, Hope and Healing with Mike and Lillie. So Recovery is Possible, you all know about, but the Hope and Healing part is the addition to it. So Lillie, could you walk through a little bit why we've decided to do that?
I think by introducing just like you were saying, Mike, it's addiction in and of itself. It affects the whole family. It's a family disease. And so I think that in your case and in my case, it's not just recovery for you, it's also recovery for the family, because I don't know if any of you may know, but Mike and I met in college. And I was 19 years old and he was 20 years old. And so, like we were mentioning earlier, we're coming up on 36 years of marriage. But I've known Mike since 1986. So I was just telling our kids in a text that your dad and I have known each other for almost 40 years. And a better part of that marriage was addiction and alcohol were a big part of that. And so it's only in the last 13 years where alcohol has not been present in our marriage, but it was in the vast majority of our marriage. And I, for one, having known you all these years, have seen the progression of how alcohol really changed your life and how it was ingrained in our marriage. And so it's not a one and done, meaning as you stopped drinking 13 years ago, it's not like life went back to the way it was. I'd known you when alcohol was a big part of your life. And so now seeing you live your life without alcohol over the last 13 years, you've changed. You've changed quite a bit. But at the same time, I've changed. I had to become adjusted to understanding how alcohol was a disease and how it had consumed you. And that every year beyond in recovery, I've seen a great change in you over those years. But at the same time, I've also had to change too, where you and I had countless conversations where you would remind me, hey, Lillie, I'm adjusting to life without alcohol. You can't expect me, where alcohol was a big part of my life in all those years of marriage, to say, okay, you've gone through treatment. Okay, you're back to normal, whatever that normal is. I, in a lot of respects, locked you in a box where I had not changed as a result of you changing. So I've had to also change alongside of you and to get used to you, learning those tools in terms of living without alcohol.
Yeah, and I will say that in my recovery experience, now professionally, because this is what I do for a living now, I'm an addictions therapist at a detox unit. But even before then, just sponsoring people in AA, I have to say that I have been fortunate in the fact that I've had a spouse that has been very supportive, been very helpful, been really took the time to learn the disease herself and support me in many ways. I mean, it hasn't been perfect. I mean, there are times when, even Lillie struggled and had to be reminded of the disease. And I'll give you an example of this. And you got to remember that this is a disease that does not change overnight. You don't get healed overnight. For example, a lot of people will go through treatment and they'll go through, say, a 28-day treatment period or a 60-day treatment period. And their loved one gets their person back, and they think, oh, well, you're fixed. You graduated, right, from that program. You've graduated, so you're fixed. Well, that's not how it works. This is a lifelong process, and it takes a lot of time for your brain and your body, the neural pathways, the GABA, the melatonin to increase, the B series of vitamins. There's a lot of adjusting that your body has to go through, not just behaviors, but your body has to go through. And in fact, the medical definition of long-term recovery is 5 years. Think about that. That's 5 years that your body is readjusting and reprogramming itself. And I remember, you might remember this story, Lillie, when I was about a year into recovery. Lillie and I get into one of those knockdown, drag-out arguments. Those of you that have been married for more than 3 hours probably are familiar with that. You get into that knockdown, drag-out argument over nothing. And what the argument with Lillie and I was about, maybe some of you can relate to this. Lillie has this thing about like clothing being on the ground, and it really bothers her, and it doesn't bother me at all. I don't really understand what the big deal is. I mean, after all, those socks on the ground, I'm just going to wear those again tomorrow. Now I know where they are. They're right there on the ground. I couldn't care less that they're there. But apparently it bothers Lillie that there's socks on the ground. And we get into this knockdown, drag out argument where I'm thinking, hey, if we keep this up, the police are going to show up. And I remember finally just saying to Lillie at a certain point, hey, Lillie, it's progress rather than perfection. Right now, your biggest concern is that these socks are on the floor. This time last year, your concern was I was in those socks on the floor due to my drinking. So I'm improving. I'm not perfect, but I'm improving. And I remember she looked at me and she smiled and she says, don't pull that AA crap on me. So it is progress rather than perfection. But the point being is that even with someone like Lillie who really took the time to understand the disease, a lot of the folks that I work with, their spouses really are not interested in learning about the disease. And their attitude is, hey, you should be fixed right now. Those are your meetings. I don't need to, I don't need to go to them. And B, I don't want to hear about them. And oh, by the way, what do you mean you have to go to a meeting on a Tuesday night or Wednesday night? I thought you were fixed. We need our time back. And they become resentful of that. And what that says to me is they don't really understand how this works. So, Lillie, what are your thoughts on that?
So, Mike, you've been active in AA, and then I've been in Al-Anon myself for, many, many years. And so we say even in AA, and probably in Al-Anon too, it's not, you're not in the program, you have seniority because you're in it. It's a support group of non-professionals who are together. And so even though I'd been in Al-Anon for a while, it's when you're hit with something that's what comes to, that's where you're able to exercise those tools, because it can all be head knowledge, but until you apply it in your day-to-day life, that's what's going to sink in and what's going to take. And so when I remember the first time you got out of treatment, the very next day you relapse. And so I'm thinking, oh my God, you've been gone all this time, and you relapse the day after. The second time you went to treatment, You did the same thing. The very next day, you relapsed. And so as a family member, of course, I'm like, okay, you went to treatment. I mean, you're spending thousands of dollars to go to these places, but then the very next day, you're going to relapse. And so you would always say to me, hey, when I go to treatment or every time I detox, it's a reminder that this is a disease. It's not a fixer-upper that it can be fixed, with a snap of your fingers. So definitely having lived through that, it's, having lived through it, you're like, gosh, it feels like a punch in the gut. It really does, because you love that person, right? I love you, and to see you relapse so quickly after, thinking that the treatment or whatever you received through and all that, you would think, wow, and you relapse so quickly. It was really hard for me to be able to adjust. Now, of course, looking back on it, you've got all these years of sobriety, and it's just knowing now that it is a long process. So the only thing that I would say to family members is, if you're in it, you have to be in it for the long haul. Because like you said, it's a disease. There's no formula on what's going to make the other person for it to stick, right? Each person is different. And so in your particular case, like Mike and I was just talking about a few hours ago about when he was early in recovery, we're like, okay, we're going to get all the kids involved, or we're going to have this. I went online and bought all these little coins, these 24-day coins, right? And we put on the calendar and we strung out 90 days worth of 3 calendars for 3 months. And then we bought all these coins. We're like, okay, every day you go to a meeting, we'll put a coin on a day. And then so you might have like 3 or 4 coins on that particular day. And we're saying, we'll see how long you could go. And then it might be a few days to weeks, right? You would get like maybe 62 days and you'd have a relapse. And we'd have to take all the coins off and start over again. And after a while, after like maybe 6 months worth of these relapses over like 30 days or 35 days or whatever, it became to a point where it was just discouraging, not only for you, but for me, and then for the kids. And so we were like, well, okay, let's not do this anymore. Not that it was not to incentivize you, but it really sealed the deal that this is a disease. It's not a formula, and every single person is different in terms of what's going to trigger you, or it's going to cause you to have, a relapse or a slip along the way. And so those were tough. That was early on in sobriety, within at least definitely your first year. And so we have to treat it like a disease and not think that it's some sort of instant gratification, instant type of healing, that it's not. It's just not that way.
Yeah, and I think that what happens with a lot of people and why it takes so long to get into recovery for many people is that it is really a disease. You have to look at this as a disease in the mind and the body. I talk to the patients at the hospital quite a bit about this, and I think those of you that own a computer, work with a computer, which is just about everybody these days, you're probably familiar with malware. Malware comes onto a computer, and what does it do? It takes over. It basically hijacks the computer, and it makes it do things that the computer, you don't want the computer to do, right? Well, your brain's your computer, and what happens with addiction is that the malware, meaning your drug of choice, whether it's alcohol, methamphetamine, fentanyl, heroin, whatever your drug of choice is. By the way, process addictions are the same way. Those are the addictions where you don't actually put a chemical in your body, but yet are still addictive. And we'll talk about those some other time. But what happens is the addiction comes in and it hijacks your brain. And this is the only disease that we know of that tells you that you don't have it. It tells you that you don't have it. And by the end of your addiction, most addicts will tell you that there's probably no one in the room that wants them to get sober more than them. They want to get sober. Well, then the question is, well, then why don't you get sober? Because your brain is hijacked. You do that in which you don't want to do. And this is something that must take time, and it's something that starts with a process. And the process is, one, you make that unequivocal decision in your soul that you want to get well. I am convinced at this point in my own journey that if you do not, in your soul, want to get well, you're not going to get well. Okay. But once you make that decision that you do, it's a hell of a lot of work and it requires a lot of support. Now, when Lillie tells my story, the fact is I wanted to get well. I really did. And when I came out of treatment those both times, I wanted to get well. I really did. And the deflating part is that we've been conditioned to believe that relapse and using is actually the choice of the person. And we put a moral equivalency on this. And we say, you don't want to get well. You don't love me. You know what? You'd stop using if you loved me more. You'd stop using if you loved the kids more. You'd stop using if you went to the gym more. You'd stop using if you're a better employee, fill in the blank. That if we did those things, that we would get well. But one has nothing to do with the other. Now, the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous refers to the relationship between the person and alcohol as being an allergy. And Webster's definition of an allergy is the body having an abnormal reaction to a substance. So if we use that allergy analogy, imagine this. Imagine if, like here in Virginia, things bloom and I have allergies and I have all kinds of snot and mucus coming out of my body. And imagine if you said to me, Mike, you know why you have all that snot coming out of your face when things bloom? It's because you don't love me enough. You don't love the kids. You're not a good enough employee. You don't go to the gym enough. You don't go to church enough. And I would look at you and I'd say, what does that have to do with anything? And the answer is nothing. It is because I have no control over that. It's an allergy. And the fact is that for me to not have a reaction, it means that I don't get exposed to that, which is causing those reactions in my body. And that's what alcohol and drugs are like. Now, so it's not a moral equivalency, but the problem is with the families is we look at this and our loved one relapses and we say, it's because you're not trying hard enough. You don't love me enough. And one doesn't have anything to do with the other. And I think in my particular case, the one benefit that I had was, I had a wife that did not give up. My kids didn't, even though they were young at the time, they didn't give up. And the most important thing was I didn't give up. If I did one thing right, and Lillie, we'll get your opinion on this. If I did one thing right, and that was for whatever reason, going back to about 2003, when I attended my first AA meeting out in Texas, even though I didn't get sober when I was out there, I continued to attend meetings. There was something about the meetings that I liked. There was something about the people that I liked. And I also knew inherently that they were onto something and what they were saying was correct. I wasn't necessarily getting it yet, but I continued to go back and I didn't give up. So for those of you that are out there struggling, I say, continue the fight. Don't get discouraged by relapses. Don't get discouraged by falling on your face every once in a while. It's not about how many times you fall. It's, are you going to get back up again? And so I continued on. But I will tell you that what did help was, as Lillie described, with the calendars and the coins, I did have that support. And I knew that the family wanted to help me in any way that they could. So just some thoughts on that, Lillie.
So, Mike, I think that just listening to you, I was just thinking about that. There were days where, very close to when you hit long-term sobriety, it was a point where it was darkest between you and I. And we could talk a little bit more about that on that fateful night. I don't know if you want to go through that sometime in the future. But what I was going to say was, I always thought that even though I was in the program and I was doing all the stuff, there were days where I would be like, well, if I just said something or I did something or I threatened you, somehow in order to be able to catch your attention, that you would see the light and then you would get into recovery. And I kept thinking, okay, I'm the person that God is using to bring you into recovery. And then it got to that point where I realized, okay, well, if it's not going to be me, then maybe it's going to be somebody else. Especially when things got really sour and it was getting worse between the two of us. And so to that point where I'm already talking to friends where I'm like, hey, if I move out, we'll have to, sell the house, we'll get another apartment, I'll be with the kids. And so I never, in my particular case, was not intending to divorce you, but I also knew that because of your condition, it was not healthy for the kids and I to be in the same home, because the addiction was just completely taking over. I mean, you were essentially every night coming home, going in the garage, and basically drinking until you were passed out. So you were just non-existent. You were always drunk, so you couldn't take the kids to any of their activities. And so it was either work and then drink, and you just weren't there. And of course, I was going to see a counselor at the time, a therapist, and she's like, your husband has abandoned you, yet he's in the house. So it's not actually healthy for you to be in the house when he, whether he's refusing or just can't, and you're in that environment. And so for me, I think that I was preparing myself to still be there for you, be in the local area, but actually not be physically present, because you were getting to the state where you were, you just weren't there. And so that's interesting that it'll be interesting to hear from you, because that's where I was in my state, planning on leaving, but then reminding you that I would always be there. So what happened? It wasn't anything that I said per se. So I'm curious to see from you what happened, where was it, because I know it wasn't me. There was something else that drew you to take your recovery more seriously from my perspective. What happened?
Well, I think that it is, you just have to not give up hope. And I had decided that there was a certain point in my life, like I knew that this was a problem. I was under no illusion that it wasn't a problem. Again, it's that malware. It's something that takes over your entire being. And I think with a lot of, particularly men, not only men, but particularly men, I think our identities are wrapped up in our job. And, particularly when you come out of the military or law enforcement like I did, that's particularly true, where your identity is wrapped up in that. And there's this idea that if you still have your job, well, then how bad could it be? You still have your job. Well, what happened was it was getting to the point where, the family was getting ready to go, didn't have a relationship with the kids. And the sick part about the disease is the disease tells you, well, that's okay. You still have your job. And so as long as I have my job, then that, what's the problem? Well, then those doors were starting to close in, because I was having people at work that were confronting me and saying things at work. And then when the job started getting threatened, then it was like, I need to take this even more. Not that I wasn't taking it seriously, because I actually was, but it was like, okay, where's the day of reckoning? And I kind of knew that the day of reckoning was coming, and then it finally did. And that was when, many people with addiction, suicidal ideations start coming into play. And that's when it was really, really starting to get real. And so to answer your question, I think that's where really, it was forget about the job, forget about the family. Like, I'm not going to be around. And I was, about 45 years old at the time. And I just realized, when we talk about having a higher power, let me address that for a second, because that was a big part of it. Now, I am a religious guy, okay? I am a religious guy, but I know that not everybody is. And people really get hung up on this term higher power. They go, well, that's code for God, and I don't believe in God, and I don't want to believe it. They get really turned off, and they start thinking that recovery programs are religious programs. They actually aren't. But what I'm telling you is that this idea of higher power or higher purpose, let's just use that term, I think you have to have that. And I think in my particular life, because when you ask what was the change in me, it was apparent that you've known me long enough. You've known me for a very long time. I'm a purpose-driven person. I have a vision of what I want to do. I have a vision of this idea that I want to help other people. I want to help the community. I want to help the nation. After all, we're doing this podcast. Why do I do this podcast? Because I'm bored? No, it's because I'm driven. I have a higher purpose in trying to help other people in the community. And that was another part of it too, was I felt like, hey, look, I'm 45 years old. I had really risen in my chosen career field. In fact, some people consider where I was in my career to be sort of the pinnacle of that particular profession. And then I thought, yeah, but I'm 45 years old and this is the end of it. And I'm going to go out in a very, very bad way. And I didn't want that to happen. And I had that vision of there's so much more left to be done. And when you get into recovery, and this isn't just me, this is like just about everybody you talk about in recovery, is that you get to the point where you realize that you were saved somehow from your own self-destruction, and you become you have a hyper realization that you're going to die at some point, that your time on earth is limited, and that you have people to help, and that you have a purpose, you have a drive to help others, and you don't have a whole lot of time, because if you think about your life, it's not that long, really, in the span of history. You have a lot of work to do, so let's get to it. And that's kind of how I started, like that paradigm shift of life started to come about.
Wow, that's powerful, Mike. Because as you were speaking, that comes to terms when, like you said, you start having those suicide ideations. So it just reminded me, so that would have been 14 years ago, where by this time you're in the hospital, you had an episode that night, and then we were bringing you to the hospital. And then the very next morning, I remember the nurse was interviewing you, and then she's asking you, "Sir, do you know why you're here?" And he's like, "Are we here because of my wife?" And she's like, "No, we're here because your wife was concerned. She and your son brought you into the emergency room because you had thoughts of suicide." And he's like, "Oh, like you don't even remember, right?" So it was like, wow. And you and I had a conversation that morning, and we're like, you could have died by your own hand and you wouldn't even remember. And I remember that look on your face. And so that's when we decided, to try to find the doctor that the nurse had recommended. And then that was from that point forward, you were really serious about getting better.
That doctor, by the way, ironically, is the doctor that I work for now, right? All these years later, I actually work for that guy.
Yeah, and that's
today.
Equally even amazing, yes.
Yeah. It's by the way, just as a side note, all of my internship and residency and employment, it was never planned this way, but where I have done my training and had my employment as a recovery therapist, were places I was a patient at, which is kind of, I don't know that many people have that experience, but that's mine. So it just shows you that it comes full circle. Well, so that is how I got to where I am. But Lillie, I know you do a lot of Al-Anon work, and you do a lot of helping with others, and in fact, you do some things through church too when it comes to helping others. But what are the things? Okay, so what are the things that you see with family members? I'm on this end of it with a person that's suffering from addiction, but you do work with people that are on the other end, i.e. the spouses and family members. What are you seeing, and what some sort of advice would you give them?
So where I am today, I think that a lot of individuals who struggle, the family members who struggle with the person suffering from addiction, is very similar to what I encountered, right? It's like they come through the door with this idea of what can I do in order to force or make the other person go into recovery. But it's not all of them, right? Some of them, that's what I thought when I went into the meetings, thinking, okay, give me tools and tell me what to do to force the other person to go into recovery. And as we've stated in this episode, that wasn't the case, right? It wasn't what I did. I was planning on leaving, and yet something happened to you, and you on your own decided, hey, I want to live. And I was able to be there, and I'm very blessed to have been there when you were there, because if I had left you 13 years ago, where would we be? So, but it's not for everybody. In my particular case, I knew when I met you when I was 19 years old that this is a man that I want to stay with, together with for the rest of my life. And then when the addiction set in, I thought, wow, maybe this isn't the person that I'm supposed to be with for the rest of my life. But then now 13 years later, in our relationship, I know you are the person that I'm supposed to be with for the rest of my life. And so, and that's just our situation. But in the people that I meet, there's different camps that I see. One, they're either coming for advice, tools in order to change the other person. But some of them are very mature when they come through the door. I don't know whether or not they're seeing counselors or therapists or in their own reading. They recognize, or maybe there's a program for the family members, but they come with this very mature perspective that they want to know everything about the disease so that they can better help their loved one. And that's really the key, is you cannot determine the fate of your loved one. They may die. They may not die. But are you, as a family member, going to be okay? And so I think it's very important to learn as much of the disease as possible, with this realization that you may not be able to save the other person, but you also don't want to lose yourself. And you've got to take care of yourself. It's like, I think you've said it before, right? When an airplane is falling and then the mask comes down, you don't put the mask on the other person. You put the mask on yourself so that you're able to help the other person. So it's vitally important, if you're a family member, to learn as much as you can about the disease. Make sure you get counseling, whether it's a professional therapist or you're in a support group, because regardless of what happens to that other person, you need to make sure that you're okay, whether it's for yourself, for your children, or other family members, support group, your brothers and sisters and whatnot, especially if it's a father or mother or grandparent or whatnot. You need to take care of yourself first. Otherwise, you're no good to anybody.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It really is. Now, for those that fit into the category that I was talking about with the men that I work with, whose spouses, it's funny because many of them they were going to leave, just like you were going to do. You were going to leave the family. They were just fed up. They were going to take the kids. They were going to get divorced. Then their loved one gets sober. And then within a few weeks, it's like, hey, why do you have to go to this meeting now? What about this? What about that? This is taking a lot of time. This is really starting to bother me that you're involved in this. Why aren't you well now? What advice would you give those folks when they have a loved one that's in early recovery, and yet now they become almost as frustrated with the recovery process as they were with their loved one when they were trying to get well? Because I know you've run into that as well.
So I would say, so one thing that I learned, right, you don't, whether you're a coach or you're a member of the program, is we don't give advice, right? But we do share our experience, strength, and hope, and that if somebody either can take it or they can leave it. So, because unless you're sitting in that person's shoes, you can't tell them what to do, because number one, it might not work. So you don't want to be guilty of that. But then at the same time, every person, when they make a choice to do something, they're the ones that has to live with the consequences. So I want to make sure I caveat that. Now, in my particular case, when you make mention of, so we had a little bit of a different situation. When you went into recovery and you took it seriously, you actually wanted me to go to all your meetings. And I'm like, and some of them were closed. And I'm like, hey, Mike, I'm reading the instruction here. It says that this is a closed meeting. It's only for the alcoholic. Oh, no, I want you with me. I'm like, oh. So then I would go with you. And then I remember we're going around sharing, and then it was a closed meeting. And the guy turns to me and I'm like, actually, I'm not in recovery. My husband wants me to be here. So they gave you a look, but they still welcomed me, even though I was there. And then from that point forward, I'm like, hey, I'm not going to go to those meetings with you. So I would actually just stay in the car. And I knew that it was probably because that was the first time, at least for you, that you knew that the meetings were essential for your well-being, but you wanted me there. And I appreciated that. But I knew that it probably was not in your best interest, right? You needed to make your own friends. You needed to make, bond with other people who were fellow alcoholics.
But it was like a transition process for me, though. I mean, I eventually got there. I mean, I'm not like that anymore. But I think in the beginning, I think for a lot of guys, particularly people that come out of my background, there's this uneasiness, this, it was, in the beginning, I think that there's a lot of shame How often do you see these people say, I don't want anybody to know that I'm here. I'm not going to talk to anybody. You feel like just putting a bag over your head so nobody can see you going in, and you're afraid that, what if I see somebody in these meetings that I know? Today I could care less. I got to remember, if they're in the meeting, unless they took a wrong turn at the Walmart and they were looking for the Walmart gardening section and turned left instead of right and ended up in an AA meeting instead of the gardening center, that's probably, they need to be there. But in the beginning, you're just so hypersensitive. And I think that's where I was. And you know what? I know you didn't enjoy doing that, but I think in a way it helped me sort of make that transition, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. And it's interesting to hear from your perspective, because I'm making assumptions based on what I think you're doing, and I don't think that you actually expressed it to me at that time, or maybe you did, but it's been several years and I don't remember. So anyway, going back to that, I think that just like I was talking about earlier, that it takes time for your brain to heal. It's all those chemicals that you were saying. And so as your body is adjusting, not only chemically, but then also socially, your social circles, right? You are so used to isolating yourself in your garage, in our garage. So then I needed to make sure that, I was still working at the time, right? So for me, it was important for me to just allow you to keep going to those meetings, right? Because you needed to create your own social network of support. And I was already getting it from my own meetings. And so recognizing and knowing it was a disease, I recognize it's going to take you some time. And so, but at the same time, or not even but, and at the same time, since you were on the road towards recovery, it actually gave me some peace of mind, knowing that you were actively trying to get better so that I could focus on myself so that I could get better.
Yeah, so it was helpful in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did. That's not necessarily to say that, those of you listening will have that same experience, because everybody's experience is slightly different. But do understand that the way that it is now, in early recovery, because there's stages to recovery. You got to remember that too. That in the early stages of recovery, there's a lot that goes into it. They also have the pink cloud, right? And those of you that aren't familiar with the pink cloud, that is when the person with the addiction issue ends up initially in recovery, and they've got it, like they're truly in recovery. A lot of times they get what's called the pink cloud, meaning it's like, wow, it's almost like they're born again. They found the answer, and this is great. My life has gotten great. Everything's great, and you got to get a piece of this. And they get so excited about it that their whole lives become really just wrapped around recovery. And the loved ones have been waiting for this for years, so you think they'd be on board, but not necessarily. Now you're kind of like, hey, you know what? I almost saw you more when you were drinking and drugging than I see you now, because you're just off on this experience. It's very predictable. Almost everybody that gets into long-term recovery goes through that process. But you have to understand that that will taper out. There will become a bit more balance in time. You'll find the meetings that you go to. You'll get to, where it might be a meeting every day. In fact, in some cases, multiple meetings a day. Maybe it will be several times a week. It could become multiple times, every single day during the week. It may stay that way, but it will become more balanced. Particularly when it comes to, your loved one will work with people that want to get well, as opposed to chasing everybody down out there that they think that needs to go get well, because they'll find in time that that's really not in their best interest even to do that you really need to spend your time with the people that want to get well, not that needs to get well. Remember, there are a lot of people that need to get well, but the difference is the need to get well and the desire to get well, and that's who you'll focus your time on. And you begin to learn that, and then it becomes a bit more balanced. You start to set boundaries with people, and then your personal family time will become more balanced as well. So just expect that sort of onslaught in the beginning, just knowing that we'll taper out. Did you notice that? Because I know that I was much more aggressive in the early days of recovery than it is now. Because right now, alcohol is just not part of my life anymore. I really don't even think about it. I'm just so involved in other things now that really the only time I talk about alcohol is when I'm at meetings or I'm doing this podcast. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree, Mike. I remember early on, and it was clear to me that you were taking your sobriety seriously because you were jumping in with both feet, right? I didn't have to do anything. It was clear that you were serious about your sobriety because it was so different early on where I felt like I was trying to push you to do things. But then when you took your recovery seriously, you were on fire. I mean, you were doing all these things to, to put your recovery first. And it was nice to see it, quite frankly. But there was a stark difference between me trying to push you versus you taking the bull by the horn and you were leading the effort in your own sobriety. So the other thing I wanted to bring up real quick was that for the families, right? For the families who are struggling with, now they've got somebody who's in recovery and they're doing all these things that may or may not involve me or that person. And so I think that for me, it's like, I just had to let you go, right? Because, you always said to me, I don't know if you learn it in those circles about, hey, we don't ask you to change anything. We ask you to change everything. So recognizing that alcohol was so ingrained in your life, I knew that there were so many things that you needed to do so that it would no longer be a part of your life, right? So you've got to learn how to live without alcohol. Well, how do you do that? There's this huge void that you need to find yourself. Instead of drinking late at night from 8 on until you pass out, what do? Just sleep? No, you got to come. You went to meetings. You did things like, hey, I'm going to make myself teach spin every morning at 5 a.m. And I'm like, that's crazy. Why would you do that? And you're like, well, it's going to force me to go to bed because I have to get up really early. I didn't suggest that to you. You came up with these great novel ideas specifically for you. So that brings to mind, like I mentioned earlier, there's no cookie cutter, right? There's no, you do it this way, you're going to be successful. Do this, your spouse, your loved one's going to go into recovery. Every person's different. You and I talked about before where we talked about the elephant in the room being the alcoholic or the alcohol. Instead of you and I recognizing that there's an elephant in the room and we don't acknowledge it, but yet we say, oh, to collectively as husband and wife, there's an elephant in the room. Let's fight this elephant together. And so we worked together as a team. And when things would happen that would be very difficult, you and I would say, okay, the disease is in the room. For you and I, what's the best way that we can interact with each other in order to combat this disease? And that's the elephant in the room. So we stopped working against each other and we decided that we would work together when we came across difficult situations.
Yeah, that's very, very well said. And I think that's the critical element or the piece rather that many of the people I work with are not experiencing with their spouses is they're kind of working against the person that's trying to get well. Instead of how you just mentioned it is, the enemy's over here. There's you, there's me, and then the enemy is over here. And you have to really look at addiction as like this outside force that has come between the two of you. And it really is. And the more I'm around this, the more I realize it is sort of like this dark thing, this dark spirit. I mean, dark, however you want to look at it, force, because it really is a force. And it has come in and it's come between the two of you. And what you have to do is look at that as being the enemy. And what are the two of you going to do to work on that thing and prevent it from destroying you? And when you work together, as a team, you're much more effective than if either one of you tried to take it on alone. Because there's times when you need support. Are you going to, in early recovery, I know you want to go on the cruise. I know you want to go to this party. I know you and your friends want to go to the winery or to the pub. I got that. And when your person in recovery says, I don't want to do that, and you're like, oh my gosh, our life is over. We can't go spend time with our friends. We can't do this. We can't go to the Christmas party. I can't go to the Super Bowl party. And you're thinking that your life is over. As opposed to looking at it like that, you've got to look at it as this is the period in time right now. Because I got to tell you, in deep recovery, I do all those things. We've done all of those things. But in the early days, I did have the support from you to not do that when I was very much triggered. For example, my first year in recovery, we didn't go anywhere. I didn't travel. I didn't go into grocery stores, to be honest with you. If you remember, that first Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, we stayed home. Ironically, it's one of the best holiday seasons we've ever had. But I did that because I knew that family members would drink, and sometimes they would drink quite a bit. And that was, in my first year, that was not a good place for me to be. Now, we go to those parties now. We do. But I'm deep into recovery as well. But understanding and supporting your loved one, because if you had pressured me to go to those places where I was not ready at that moment to do it, it could have been disastrous. You agree?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I remember you were telling me, and so I wanted to support you, right? And so we were honest with our family members, right? We were like, hey, this is not a good time. Whether you told them or I told them, but we became very transparent and honest with our other family members in letting them know that you were in recovery. I think that was part of the problem early on when you weren't serious about or not even just serious, or you weren't able to and didn't feel comfortable exposing to people that you were an alcoholic. By being honest and getting that word out there, then people could support you more. And so when you were ready to let the world know.
Yeah, and that's important. That's important. Well, as we close out here tonight, Lillie, any last things? Like, we have slightly changed the name here a little bit. Anything else you want to say about the addition to Hope and Healing with Mike and Lillie? Hope and Healing. So, because we're going to be expanding this, just, up until this point, this podcast has been pretty much geared towards the person with the addiction issue, but we're bringing the families in. And Lillie's going to be a big part of that as well. So any final thoughts on that before we close out tonight?
No, I think that, Mike, you just said it all. I think that we're able to round out the podcast by having a different perspective. Like you said, it's a family disease, and not that you weren't doing that. I mean, you would always have different guests on, and certainly I was one of those guests. But I think that we're going to try it, right? We'll see what it's like I won't be maybe at every episode, but certainly I'll try my best to be there with you, to support you, and bring in that other additional element on other things and topics and subjects that we could talk about, that it's not just the person in recovery, the family members involved, and that whole family system definitely is affected by the disease of alcoholism. Okay.
I think this is going to be a great addition to the podcast. And so, with that, again, this is Mike Van Meter and Lillie, and this is Recovery is Possible, Hope and Healing with Mike and Lillie. And please, if you're listening to this podcast and you know of someone that could benefit from this information, please send this podcast to them, and also to our website. And, we are going to be ramping up the number of episodes that we do. Our goal is to get one out per week, because our mission is to help those that are suffering from addiction, or those that are suffering from other people's addiction. So with that, you guys take care of yourselves, and we will be talking with you soon. You take care, because recovery is possible, and we will talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye. Hi, this is Mike Van Meter, and so as I always like to say, I do not represent any group. I do not represent anyone other than myself. My only purpose in giving this information is to share with you what I've done because it has helped me, and maybe it will help you too. If I've said something that does not apply to you or you don't agree with, then just discard it. But try to take any information that you can use for yourself and help others as well. That's what we do in recovery. We help ourselves along the way, and we help to impart the knowledge we have gained to others as well. With that, please visit our Facebook page, Recovery is Possible, and our website, VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com. Let me know how I'm doing, and let me know if there's a topic that you're interested in hearing about. I'd love to hear from you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.